All right. Now, thank you guys very much. We're live now. So a big welcome to Dan Ives. He's the managing director and senior equity research analyst at Wedbush Securities. Dan has consistently been one of the biggest Tesla bulls. He just raised the price target to $300 and he sees $400 possible next year. And most recently, he has said that Tesla is the most undervalued AI play in the market. Welcome, Dan. Thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate
great
you.
to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'll ask the first question and then we'll let everybody else ask you questions too. But we've seen the stock jump. It's now about the same price as it was in January 2nd. You always felt very comfortable that that was going to happen. Is that mostly institutional firms? And have the institutional firms just realized something's big? Is it just because auto is stabilized? Is it because they saw the energy? Or are they possibly now seeing Tesla's robotaxi and AI play coming? Or none of that? What is your
I think
thinking?
it's a combination. I think and look, me and you talked 6 months ago, you really needed auto to stabilize. And I think we saw that with 2Q, and we've seen that in China. I think there's essentially a mini rebound that's happening in China. So that stabilized. The last quarter, I thought that was a great conference call. I thought the shareholder meeting, obviously, Alexander, a key piece of it. I thought that was just a great, almost mojo to some extent in terms of the mojo coming back to the story. And now I think we have a historical event ahead with Robotaxi Day. And I'll compare it a little to Apple. Going into WWDC, many bears, right? They came out of their hibernation mode and they're like, it's going to be no big deal. Stock's gone from 180 Apple to 225. So the point is, I think this for Tesla is going to be a similar type historical day that's going to start what I view as the AI story now coming front and center.
Wonderful. Yeah. Hopefully this will continue. Alexandra, do you want to ask the next question?
Yes. So Dan, do you have the feeling that
first of all, Alexander, coolest glasses for this I think coolest glasses award goes to you. I think Lutz is second.
Did you notice I wore this today? This is honor of you, but
we all tried, and I was like, it has to be red. You see that my jacket has the Tesla T cut here. I didn't realize for a long time until people told me, but here I am, all there and already. Then I thought you would be much more colorful, so I felt like really under pressure.
I can wear my pink hat.
Okay, let's do the pink hat. Okay, good. So I got a lot of questions on your style, but we may want to get there a little bit later. Do you feel the last couple of weeks institutionals are coming back already to Tesla? Do you see that interest of your clients? And then the second part of that is, I think you're also advising hedge funds who are rather short on Tesla. Do they give up? Do you have the feeling that there is less enthusiasm on it?
Yeah, look, I think at first start, the shareholder meeting was like a huge inflection point because that was the one where I think investors just feared if something went wrong there, the comp package doesn't get passed, then this thing could go south, right? That could cascade into a spiral. It didn't. I think you played a big role as well as, many others. But that started to stabilize things. And now I think with the deliveries, remember, we talked about whisper expectations. Whispers were like 415, 420. So even though when you get 444, you'd be like streets 439. That was well ahead of whisper numbers. And I think it also shows like price stabilizations there. And also if you're as an institutional investor, you do not want to miss the AI piece now coming to the Tesla story, because I just view it as this AI party, 9 p.m. And I think it goes to 4 a.m. Tesla is kind of like getting near the dance floor from an AI perspective. And I think you look what happens with Amazon. Amazon starts to get toward dance. That's a huge reason why that stock's had a huge look at Apple as well. So I think institutionally speaking, that's really right now the key variable that investors are focused on.
Okay,
Gotcha.
and from the hedge funds, do you see short sellers being less enthusiastic or no reaction yet?
Well, I think the confidence of many that were short, if you go back 3-4 months ago, it's going to 100. This is it. And now all of a sudden, I think that's quieted down. You really don't hear that. So I think a lot of that confidence that short seller back was against the wall, but now you're not seeing the price. It's not every 2 days you're seeing price cuts. You're seeing stabilization.
True.
And look, and like when I talked about a few quarters, like adult in the room and I talked about it on here, a number of months ago, it was trying to be like, look, show the direction where this company's going. And I think Musk has done a great job on the last few conference calls doing that.
Thanks. Hey, Dan, thanks for joining us on the show. It's great to have you. Comment and then a question. In terms of margins, I do see this as a period of where we're kind of near the end of the compression, and I think we're starting the spring is starting to let loose. And I mean, we could see somewhere on the order of 19 to 20%. It's hard to predict, right, with a lot of moving parts in the quarter, but at least on gross margins, I'd like to see us there and maybe, getting over 20%, by the end of the year or earlier. That's where I see it going. And then Tesla took a series of actions. It doesn't get talked about a lot. Nearly 15% of the workforce that would hit the operational gross margin side. It was also hit the COG side inside of the factories as well, where they deprecated capital and labor in the factories to really fit like where they are today from a volume perspective. So a comment there where I see margins. And the question I was going to have for you was just around AI, and it just kind of, I'm trying to look at this as kind of a simplistic manner of really where the AI is going to come in the form of these phases. And NVIDIA has created this phase around creating the platform, creating the picks and shovels with the hardware and software solutions with CUDA. Many don't realize that Tesla designed their own inference silicon in the vehicles. It's in 7 million vehicles. It's their hardware design. It's their software running on it. And there's this debate back and forth of like, where is a lot of the AI work going to actually occur? Is it going to be on the training side in these huge super clusters, or is it going to be more on the edge device or the the product side where the inference is actually happening? And I think Tesla's ahead of anybody in terms of getting that product out. And if you were trying to think about the number of AI operations that are actually performed in a given day, and how profitable those could be with robotaxi, just today with FSD and the billions of miles, it's every single movement these cars are making, it's controlling. So I actually think that Tesla's actually has more AI output that's useful in the world than what you see today from some of the language model folks. You can get a language model for free right now from Meta with Llama 3. So the value of that's come down. The value of moving real devices through the real world, whether they're cars or eventually humanoids, have come way up. So my question is do you hear this conversation in terms of, other people that manage money? Are they starting to think of it that way? Or is it still kind of like these kind of vague conversations around, co-pilot language models and so forth? I just think that Tesla is a much further ahead than what's realized.
I think, look, I mean, it's great. But I think right now the conversation is, okay, in AI, how do you play it on chips? NVIDIA, you could argue AMD, Micron. How do you play it on software? Oracle, of course, Microsoft, ServiceNow. How do you put Palantir use cases? Okay, how do you play it on consumer? Apple, Meta, Google. How do you play it on auto? Like Tesla. So the point is now investors are focused on, from a data perspective, where Tesla could take this, and then ultimately can they OEM that technology? In other words, like, it's not just about robotaxis. I think the important thing about August 8th, it's about robotaxi, but it's trying to understand how eventually this technology could really be something that they could sell to other auto manufacturers. I think that's really how investors are going into August 8th. I think it's a two-part. What you're talking about from a data perspective, I agree with, look, I believe it's the most undervalued AI play in the market. And what I mean by that is the valuation to me doesn't really reflect any AI component today, which speaks to our view that, like, when you start to get to 1.5 trillion, like when you start to get to that's where I think the AI piece is key to getting there.
Thank you.
Dan, I'd like to pick up on the point that Jeff was making, but expand it beyond the realm of hardware, and that is to software. You know, we're seeing a huge amount of faith being placed into AI. And we've spoken about these different software companies that either have a large language model or are using some kind of chatbot or code enabler, coder. The real world use of AI has not really yet begun. We haven't really seen, the true opportunity. And, I have held that the people who will win in this game are people who have proprietary data, because the public data is going to be, it's a commodity, as commodity that's right now fairly valued at zero. So if you have a large language model, it's probably very similar in technology, and the foundational technology is going to be exactly the same. The data is going to come from almost the same sources, except for those people who have really valuable proprietary data. This is where, Tesla is separated from the rest of the world by, significant, years of, perfection, in the sense that A, they have proprietary data, B, it's extraordinarily valuable because it's about self-driving, C, we are seeing the latest release of FSD. I've seen the latest drives, the most recent drives were today, and they are extraordinary. We are getting, that close to the reality of autonomy. And so you have this kind of perfect storm of what you've talked about in terms of the hardware and, the training that Elon is putting out there, and more importantly, all the inference power that Jeff has talked about. But, it seems to me that we are looking at the first real implementation of real world AI rolling out with this car. And it seems to me that that's going to put Tesla in a position at the AI world that's, you talked about, it's early hours of the morning in AI. I think they're getting to, midday in this race, if you will.
Well, no, look, and you raise great points. I would just add too, it's about install base.
Yeah.
One of the things that separated Microsoft, NVIDIA, Apple, pick your spots. It's about having the install base that you could then ultimately sell into. So if Tesla had 500,000 cars sold, it would be a different story. When you talk about 6-7 million, eventually, getting to 10 million, that's where the story starts to really change. And I think that's going to be the key. The reason we talk about Robotaxi Day is just such a historic day, because I think I'll compare it to different companies when Jensen started on the path to AI, when Microsoft, ultimately I'd say OpenAI in terms of that deal. I think for Tesla, this is going to be the start of a whole nother chapter for the story. And that's why I think more and more it starts to become viewed as a robotics AI play rather than, now again, you'd always get the arguments, an auto company, but I think now they start to prove it more and more. And I think that's why this starts the whole chapter. And look, Optimus today, there's definitely zero value for that as well.
Yeah. And when do you think that Wall Street will change its perception away from a car company? Do you think that could be Robotaxi Day, that suddenly the whole shift happens away from a consumer discretionary picture to a tech picture?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. I think the key is, from a Wall Street perspective, it's show me the path to monetization.
Yeah.
That's the key. In other words, the technology, phenomenal, as what I talk about, the data, where they are. Like, no one could even argue in terms of where they're playing versus others. But now it's like, show me the monetization, what that could trend. I'm not talking about over the next year, but over the next 3-5 years.
Mm.
And I think that framework is going to be very important. Now, again, let's talk about Robotaxi. Does that mean, like, are they partnering with ride sharing? Like, where does that ultimately, is there a monetization? Like, think about the ride share industry. Could you have X percent that are ultimately Teslas? Do they partner with an existing ride share? So those are some examples of just like give a path to.
How are your expectations between partnering with other OEMs, car makers, finding a fleet operator partner, or walking into the ride hail business?
I think number 2,
Yeah,
is what I view as that's like the golden goose, because partnerships are great, but there's a rev share there, right? And partnerships they're good, but they also have negatives as well. Getting purely into ride share, I don't view that as necessarily the best. It's really more fleet based, where that starts to change the story, because also the fleet, that's just more and more data. It's more and more monetization, and then I could argue, then you start to almost OEM that technology as well. Maybe there's like a silver, bronze, gold. The gold stays within Tesla, but there's a bronze and a silver that could be OEM to other auto manufacturers that they can monetize, because they're so far ahead where anyone else is.
but a tie-in with a fleet operator, with a ride hail operator, seems to me the shortest road to market.
It is,
And that road to market is something the analysts understand.
definitely.
And the thesis that I've developed is that since the last earnings call, Elon seems to have taken a different perspective to his public. I mean, he seems to have changed the story up. And if we can go into 8.8 with a similar approach, I think it would be very helpful to the stock price anyway. If, I mean, he's going to have a complicated story to tell. And the question is, how does he communicate that? I think is going to be the key.
No, total. And like Herbert, we've talked, like, I remember we talked, and like I talked about like the whole, like, you gotta stabilize it, can't just talk, show the path. Investors can't focus on 3 years from now. They need stabilization. If you're an institutional investor and you're down 20% in the stock and other tech stocks are up 50%, that's job, right? And I'm trying to explain, like, so now the first step of that has been accomplished in terms of Tesla and I do agree. I mean, I think it's a different company the last few the way that they're just, and I thought the shareholder meeting too, it was a different Musk.
Yeah.
Yeah. You called it exactly what you're hoping for. I'm going to ask you 3 quick questions from the audience. The first one is, what do you think will be unveiled on 8.8 apart from the obvious?
Well, I think apart from the obvious, it's really, to Larry's point, it's trying to understand the fleet piece. In other words, are there partnerships? Are there OEM opportunities? I think that's something that's going to be very important. But I think the most important is really a deeper dive into the technology. I think it's really important that they Now I know you could argue, okay, like don't show your secrets, but it's important that they peel away the onion a little, the layers, to show investors the vision, what they've accomplished, and where it's going. So I
And
do
you
know
think
that.
it's worldwide vision, like China and the US, or would it be sufficient for them to see just the vision in the United States?
I think United States, but I think when you think about China, I mean, I think they've taken the first step there, and that's why like Zhu and others are spending so much time there. They've started to do like the pilot sort of FSD testing there, and we'll see if that could get ported to US. But this is just it's a crucial event for them to show the next phase of the story. Because if you just focus on deliveries, and like Jeff's point, like I agree, like margin leverage, especially with even like on the storage side, cuts that they've made, all right, that's important to the model. But the golden like the real vision is about what's next. And that's why I think that this day is so important.
Next question here is where there is FUD still being projected from bears and things for bulls to beware.
Yeah.
What's the FUD that
I mean,
bears
I mean, like, look, I think the thing with bears will always hang on lack of details.
Yeah, good.
It's almost like the more details you give, the bears go back into hibernation mode. But to Larry's point, if you don't give a lot of details, you almost give fodder. You give you almost give the bears something to hang their hat on. So that's
Or to
why.
invent.
What do you say, Larry?
Or they invent them. They invent the fodder.
Well, because it's a lack of detail.
Yeah.
Like if it's general, then investors will take to a negative. I just want to use Apple as an example. Bears own that story for a while, right?
Yeah.
And it was really once they took the reins at WWDC and they're like, here's it. This is Apple Intel. And that's where everyone recognizes consumer AI now goes to Apple. Now you could agree or disagree with that, but like that's huge for the stock. It was details.
Okay, and I want to ask you this question. So you've now just said $400. The Tesla stock price can hit
Bull
$400 possibly next year. Tell me, walk me through step by step of how it's going to get us there.
Look, I think the big thing with the bull case is that's where you start to factor the AI piece in. And to me, it's really the monetization path that you could start to model out 2, 3, 4 years. And what type of penetration rate they can get. Like, it's like bottoms up what the revenue model could be in AI, whether it's on the OEMs, whether it's per vehicle, how much more software they're going to get, what the margin potential is, obviously much higher than traditional auto. That's key to some of the parts, because I could argue AI is probably FSD autonomous, the most leverageable part of the story. Because even like when you talk about like sub 30K vehicle, called Model 2.5, are they selling it in China, US? Are they cutting costs? That's still around the edges, right? It's like we're not talking about models that dramatically change over the next 1, 2, 3 years. When you start to layer in autonomous FS and you do a sum of the parts, what that could add to the story, that's the game changer. But that's no different than Microsoft is Windows. They're just an enterprise. No, but now they're a cloud player. That's how it's going to be a $4 trillion market cap. NVIDIA just does GPUs, gaming. No, it's godfather of AI, Jensen. That's why they're going to be $4 trillion. Apple, they're just smartphone. No, but services is $100 billion a year annually, and I think that's worth 1.5 to 2 trillion. It just, to me, it's all sum of the parts, sum of the parts. Think about Amazon before they broke out AWS. Street never gave credit for AWS. Once they broke out AWS, that started the sum of the parts. That's why Amazon's 2 trillion. I'm just giving examples of other tech companies. It's a good, because it shows the roadmap.
Hey Dan, thanks for that. I think those comparisons are helpful. Where do you see a year from now? We're going to have elections coming up in November. A year from now, we have presidential, Senate, Congress. What do you see that landscape looking like? Not so much the results of the election, but what are the two sides of the coin for as it relates to Tesla and maybe others?
I mean, look, under Biden administration, Musk is really, it's been an afterthought or no thought, right? I think that's clear. I think the big question is if a Biden elected, then it's a status quo. I think if in a Trump White House, the EV credits go away, likely. And then to that point, I would argue it's negative for the EV industry, but positive for Tesla because of their scale. So that's my whole point, is that if you look since the debate, you've seen a lot of pressure on the EV industry. But yet Tesla, and there's specific things that have gone in Tesla as well, but I do believe that Tesla actually could benefit under a Trump White House because of that dynamic.
Particularly if there's protectionism, because Tesla is so US made, it kind of beggars all the other vehicles on the road. I mean, ICE or EV.
And let's face it, it can only improve, right? The Biden administration was obviously.
Exactly. It's not like it could get worse.
That is correct. Let me ask you a personal question. Did you recently test FSD? Do you have Teslas? Do you drive FSD?
I've tested FSD about a month ago.
How did you like it?
Look, I think and I've talked about it, it was an eye opener for me in terms of just I believe how close they're getting to what could really change the story. Because I think, look, if you're a bull on Tesla, like ourselves, FSD, autonomous AI, that's the story. I think that's the longer term story here.
Well, actually, I think that's the medium term or short term story. The longer term story is the bots, right? But I don't want to push you to the bots yet. I want to tickle out. So energy, obviously, is another just in front of our door happening now. You've seen the increase in energy deployment. It could very well be that it is about 10% of revenues when we get the numbers on the 23rd.
On the storage.
Is that going to change? Is that going to change anybody's view on a car company, or is that still not enough?
I think it's starting to get there because of what we saw in storage and also the margin piece. I think
25%, yeah.
I think the thing is that when it starts to move the needle on numbers, that's where Street starts to take notice.
Right.
So I actually think this is the first quarter where all of a sudden you're like, okay, take note. And I probably talked to maybe a dozen investors on storage since these earnings came out. And I probably haven't talked to a dozen investors on storage in the last 5 years.
Wow, that's interesting. That's a good one. So they're coming up. Okay.
It shows it's starting to be considered. It's a quiet, right? Now it does start to become more front and center because of the results.
Excuse me, but isn't it crazy that, I mean, I know you're very much into Tesla, and I know you follow us all on X, and and thank you for listening to us from time to time. I mean, I know we're Uber Bulls and we're a little bit going over what probably is reasonable, but it's great that you hear us.
But to some extent, but just to that point, there's times the reason I love engaging on X and see, because there's sometimes where I could have a view that's more I wouldn't call it tunnel vision, but there's times where maybe I'm viewing something and then I'll see people raise points and I'm that's interesting. And I do think whatever, almost 25 years doing this, covering tech, we're always we're not tunnel vision, right? We're always we always look at ourselves and be am I looking at the story right? And should I be considering this? Am I too bearish? But whatever it may be. So it's I think that's important. And I think the community, and I've told you that, I think the Tesla community does just a phenomenal job of it's almost an efficiency in terms of.
Have you ever seen a retail shareholder community like that? I mean, getting mobilized for a shareholder vote.
I mean, look, where you, and I've told this to you, it's I could go back to when you start to have some loud, whether investors be okay, compact, it shouldn't be approved, after the whole Delaware thing set this off. And then all of a sudden, it's whoa, if this thing actually doesn't get approved, the story, the story spirals, I believe, if it doesn't get approved. So just to start with, going into the shareholder meeting, and obviously everyone on this call played a huge role in terms of getting that approved. I mean, that's a historical moment. But I don't think that gets done without the retail back, right? I think retail played a huge role there, in my opinion.
And just to let you know, we're not done yet, because one of the things we discovered with all this whole voting and judge and whatever is, I mean, retail shareholder democracy still has a way to go, and may not be very interesting to you, but I think this community, because it's so numerous, I mean, I don't know whether you realize, but Tesla is the only company out there with 10 million retail shareholders. There's nothing else comparable. And not only they are, but they're active. They're active on X. They want to vote. They want to do all that. And we realized, obviously, that so many other things are not working the way it should be overseas, but also in America. So we're still all working on, direct registration of shares and many other topics to make sure that Tesla retail shareholders have their way of doing that. And I think there's a real mission, because we're so big, because we have to be the leader on that. The GameStop guys showed us 3-4 years ago, but that was a small community, and I think ours is just going to be so much more powerful.
I think at one point you're going to be teaching a class in Delaware shareholder.
Yeah, tell CNBC to have me on. I got to tell them.
I will say, the whole red glass, I could see you teaching a class. I'm saying, if you came into a classroom and I'm talking about Delaware shareholder, I'm I think right away people pay attention.
Yeah, thank you so much.
One of the most interesting facets of this whole process is we discovered that European shareholders have no voting rights in US companies because of the way the European banks register shares. And so, I was in Norway, France, Germany.
Is that when you went on your European?
Yes.
It coincided. So many things coincided, right? Larry being there.
But Larry, can you just explain that a little more, that piece?
Yeah. So what happens is when you buy a Tesla stock, a US-based stock in Europe, for the most part, almost every country in Europe I was in, the bank, the dealer, the broker dealer, retains that stock on your behalf. And there's no voting mechanism at all. So the broker dealer, whether it's a bank or whether it's a broker, gets to vote your shares for you at their leisure and their pleasure. So so if you're a US company and you have a large number of European shareholders and you want to influence their vote, lots of luck, you can't. So, in Norway, for example, a very good friend who's a large shareholder managed to prevail upon his bank to vote in the manner that he wanted his shares voted. But it was simply, it was a favor they did him. In France, a very large number of shareholders that I spoke to were unable to vote. And the same thing actually happened in Amsterdam. Germany, it's also almost impossible. In fact, this one shareholder I spoke to said it is impossible. And she had worked very hard to try and get her shares voted. So it's a real problem. And I think it's something that has to be dealt with at a government to government level.
I know, but just congrats, like Jeff, you know, Alexander, Herbert. And I'm saying, I think just during this period, see now we're talking about Robotaxi Day, AI, FSD. If everything didn't go the way it did, we're not talking about that. I'm just saying that was like, it's almost like sometimes like things happen and you forget about it. But I think that was important foundationally.
It did. And to let you know, so in about 2 weeks, Herbert and me and a couple of guests are going to do a special on this topic, because there are solutions, but we have to tackle them very early. Like I said, direct registration of shares is a solution. There are lots of aspects to it, a tax aspect to it and all that. I don't want to get into that because I could talk about it for hours. But the one thing I want everybody to understand is, when I started mobilizing people, when we all started mobilizing people, we knew we needed about 400 million retail shares, because we knew on who we could about count, and we also knew the tailwinds and the headwinds we had with American institutions that had big chunks. And 400 million retail shares, that's a huge lot. And very quickly I identified where they were: Australia, obviously Norway, the UK, a couple of other countries. And if Elon wouldn't have helped and reposted and retweeted my research saying, okay, we're going to contact these banks, and that's when the dam broke. That's when the bank suddenly said, okay, we're going to do it. And they did it manually. And again, there is no proof they did it, but what we know is we had in the end 430 million shares, where we knew we needed 400. So that effort, and I mean, again, I'm all happy that I could help, but it is those people that called their European brokers, their Australian brokers, and made it possible. And so there are a couple of solutions, just to sum it up. Either they change their brokers, because there are international brokers that are active in these countries and that can do it. So that's one way of doing it, but that may be a taxable event. Or there's direct registration of shares, or there are 2 or 3 other more complicated solutions. So we're working on that and we're doing that. But what I realized, I mean, do you think 6 months ago I would have thought I was working on retail shareholder democracy, because that's what it is? And now suddenly this topic comes up, and that's what Tesla does to you. That is the passion for this stock and for the CEO. That's, I mean, and all of us. I mean, Jeff knows so much about COGS. I mean, my life, did I not think I would listen hours and hours with so much interest on COGS, right? Or Larry on his models or whatever. It's just incredible how each of us wants to dig into these things and gets problems solved. And that's what Tesla does to you.
No, that's great.
So now another personal question. Have you driven a Cybertruck, Dan?
Yes.
Isn't that something?
So, I mean, look, a lot of times, like with investors, when you bring them to like the factory, or, they see different parts of Tesla around the world. I think that's also like eye-opening, because there's many investors, like, they've never seen it. So I think when you actually go to a factory, or you go to Giga, or you go abroad, I think you have a different appreciation for the process.
So Dan, I want to get to know you a little bit better, and I think I've heard where you fit in the institutional firm investor spectrum, right? You've got ARK Invest, and you've heard Elon say at the annual shareholder meeting that their robotaxi plan and forecast is dead on. That's what he thinks is right. They are forecasting significant trillions of dollars market cap. They're willing to do that because they've got disruptive technology. You've got other institutional firms that say, hey, until I see a revenue stream, that's when I'll start modeling it out. And that's when I'll think about the possible future. For me to just confirm, you are kind of in the middle because you say, I just need to see a monetization path. I just need to see the monetization program. And if I could see that, that's what allows me. So when you hear August 8th come, and if they say, here's the plan, here's the program, here's how much we might charge, is that enough for you to then model it into your program, and then you might decide then to raise your price targets, or what are you waiting for?
That starts them providing the details to where you can then start to be. Now, others could argue, others be like, I disagree. But that's where it becomes the debate on the street in terms of how soon, what's the value, and where that can go. But it goes to what I said with Larry, like as many details as possible to show the blueprint.
Yeah. It needs to give the analysts something to actually calculate off, that they can build the story for themselves, and then determine where they think the opportunity lies, or the threats or the risks lie.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think
But then
I think on
when you
8/8 they're
say-
going to give the outline. Sorry, Herbert.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
You're saying you give the outline 8/8.
I was just I think on 8/8 they're going to give an outline. They're not going to give all the answers to the test, but I think Elon walks on stage. I think he opens the Tesla app. I think he summons the new Cybercab. I think they'll have a prototype of that vehicle to display. I think it's going to be futuristic looking. It's also going to be utilitarian in terms of its materials, its finishes, its form, its function. And I also believe that they may announce some form of, Herbert disagrees with me on this, but some form of maybe human-driven, human-supervised network to work out the kinks before they go unsupervised. And yeah, so I those are my expectations for 8/8. But I think it's important that they get into the business model, but it would be unlike Tesla to give like the full like contours of it.
Exactly. I'm not saying that they're going to give an X, Y, and a Z, but it's to give the blueprint. That's exactly.
Dan, is your robotaxi? I just heard some other analysts, and they'll go, "I believe in robotaxi. It's going to happen, so it's in my model." Then they go, "Well, it won't happen until 2040." Okay, and then they'll
a lot sooner. I mean, we've talked about by the end of the decade, it's something that is extremely feasible. And I think the monetization path when it comes to robotaxis is a lot sooner than the streets modeling or anticipating.
What's your thoughts on the bot? Yeah, how is the same thing? Right now, you don't want to talk about it?
I view that as much longer. And it was like, I'm not dismissing. Of course, it's an important piece. I'm just saying, like, from a stock perspective right now, the big focus, besides, of course, auto and some, it's really how quickly could the AI autonomous be monetized, and what's the path there? Because I think that's going to be the key.
If next year they have 2,000 bots, but they work only for Tesla, they're not selling it, there's no monetization plan, you're still going to ignore it?
It's not ignore it. It won't be something that would be significantly factored into the stock. Like it's,
okay,
you know what I mean? Because I think there's a difference between what gets credit from a stock perspective versus the company because like there's so many times like management teams, right? They'll be like, we did this, we did that. I'm like, look, that in $3
It's
Yeah,
not
like,
a pet
Get
project.
your Dunkin'
Not a
Donuts.
pet project. It's not a pet project. Let me ask you
No.
another question. You said earlier you were already in some of the factories. If you could ask Tesla to visit the next factory, what would it be? Austin, Shanghai, the energy factories,
What
or
do
the
you mean
bot
Shanghai?
factory? Well, I don't know. You want to visit
No,
Shanghai?
Shanghai is the one, and that's the one.
You want to see?
That's one of the only ones I haven't seen. Yeah, and I'll hopefully be there in the fall.
In Shanghai again? In the Tesla factory?
Yeah.
You're not interested to go to the Fremont factory where they work on the bot?
I've been there many.
No, I'm not saying on the car one, on the bot one. Too early?
The bot one is one where I think that's more.
Yeah, you think it's a pet project. I hear it. You think
I think that'll be important. No, like that's not like that will be an important part at one point. But I'm always look at the end of the day, like I'm focused on like what drives stocks. So
on a 6 to 12 months horizon, right?
Yeah, and the thing is like sometimes like on like on X, like this is so short term focused. Look, it would be like that's the reality of what drives. You could have longer term views, but it's very important to understand like next 6-12 months. And we have longer term focus, like Optimus, that'll be a longer term. But right now, in terms of near term, it's really, of course, the auto, the Model 2.5, and then, of course, everything happened on AI autonomous.
Got it. And sorry, I have to correct myself. The Optimus is in Palo Alto. I just saw that comment.
Yep.
So we have this debate, Dan. Maybe you can answer it. So of the three that's possibly coming, there's a robotaxi event, but then the robotaxi monetization, commercialization might not happen until next year. You've got the unveil of the new, lower, more affordable vehicles that could come by the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next year. They could actually even commercialize it at that time. And then there is the bot, which you said even 2000, still not going to be commercialized for another 2 years. Which of these three is going to move the stock the most, the soonest?
It's number two. I think having that sub 30K in the first half of 25, that it could drive volume. Because I could argue, the whole key with like robotaxi and everything else, it's like, but you need to okay, now show me the path how we can get to 3, 4, 5 million per year. You're not going to get there at 45, 50, that right? I mean, you really need. So I think that's why that's probably the most important. But that's also why, like, look, it's important. Like a robotaxi, like they'll talk about, but also it's like this is almost like a 1-2 punch. It's robotaxi, AI, autonomous. Then next, of course, it's the unveil.
Yeah, I just my opinion, I don't think there will be a sub 25 or 25K vehicle in the first half, but I do think these interim vehicles Herbert was referring to will bring the COGS down of the 3 and Y, 10% or more, which will be meaningful in the marketplace. And it'll actually de-risk the 25K ramp that will probably happen in the middle to latter half of 2025. One hint I want to just put out there, or sorry, Dan, go ahead.
I've seen you say that before.
Yeah. One thing I just want to put out, just back to Optimus really quickly. We've talked ad nauseum about Tesla and AI and that lead that they have, and they'll pick that up and continue with Optimus. But the one thing I just want to put out there as you start thinking about this is supply chain, and not to have everybody's eyeballs roll in the back of their head and bore them. All I'll say is Tesla they have the best auto supply chain in the industry, and there's quantifiable facts. Gartner has measured them in respect to auto and with respect to all industries. So the number 14 supply chain out of all industries that they measure, and they're number one in auto. Toyota was about 10 spots behind them. Toyota is definitely a number 2. So that supply chain prowess is going to be the other secret killer weapon with them and the bot.
Yeah, exactly. And Herbert, to Jeff's point, it's kind of like storage. Like you said, 2,000. If they have 2,000 Optimus, and in the fact, it's kind of like storage. Storage, like okay, no one's gonna give a credit. Now all of a sudden move numbers. I'll give a credit. So if you start to, they all of a sudden could be like, let's say a year from now, and they're like, gross margins went up by 150 bips or whatever because of the efficiency from this in the that is now that does change things. Does that make sense? Like, I think it's like that would be a good example to Jeff's point where that would quicker be factored in.
Well, that's going to happen. I mean, you're going to get tremendous labor and capital efficiency once they can dial in a humanoid robot. But just the companies that are trying to build a humanoid robot, China will figure it out, and they will get some, some supply. They'll be a good number 2, if not tied for number 1. But Tesla has, from a supply chain perspective, they're in the best position to actually scale. There's a lot of people that roll a bot out on stage, but I would say 90% of those companies are going to be dead at the starting line, or it's going to take them several years to get to the scale that Tesla will get to.
And
so just keep that in mind
too, right? Like that was, I mean, it was painful, in terms of those cost cuts, but they almost had to be in front of it.
Yeah, I've seen the bills of materials of several of these companies and these bot companies, and they range anything from $180,000 down to about $85,000, $75,000. I mean, the bot doesn't really become interesting until you're well below the $50,000 mark. And that's the magic point. There's a magic point there. I'm not sure exactly where it is. But I think to Jeff's point that there's nobody in this business other than perhaps a Chinese firm that I don't know of yet that can scale and can reduce the manufacturing cost of the product to a point where it actually makes commercial sense and functions extremely well. So I think it's a subject that's going to become into focus very rapidly in the course of this coming year. In the next 12 months or 15 months, that subject is going to become so in focus, and it's going to become crucial for our manufacturing moxie, whether we have a manufacturing future or not in this country, in my judgment anyway.
I agree. And I'm going to go in like 2 minutes.
Yes.
Oh, so we want to know who dresses you. Come on, give it to us.
I talked it in the New York Post article that, I talked about it. I mean, I dress myself. I mean, I don't have any
So how often do you go shopping? Where do you shop? Who is your tailor? Tell us all about it.
I mean, look, part of it is I've traveled, I think, over 3 million air miles. So the point is by traveling so much, I have a lot of places globally that I get stuff from, or when I'm there. So it's from everywhere. I mean, I got this shirt in Bali. I got these shoes in LA.
And reassure us, you're not sitting in Paris right now, right? You're sitting somewhere else.
I'm sitting undisclosed location. I'll be in Paris in a few weeks.
It's great that you travel so much. It's wonderful. Well, I mean, just to let you know.
But also that's been our edge. It's the way that we've been able to.
That's your edge. It is.
You stand out.
You can't, if you try to call tech stocks from the 10th floor of your New York City office building, it's not,
You have to go
Actually,
and see
it's not your colorful clothes. Also, that makes you stand out. It's your colorful language. You are just so right on top of what needs to be said at what moment, and that's what we appreciate. The most undervalued AI play in the market. It's 9 o'clock, and the party is going to go till 2. I mean, you've said so many of these.
4 a.m.
And then you should know 20,000 people watched us live right now. 20,000 people. And this is just the beginning, because obviously now it's going to be on YouTube and on X for a while.
Thanks for everyone just taking time out of their day to watch.
I know. They wanted to hear you, and they're happy they did.
No, I appreciate and just thanks for everyone. And I have fun doing it. And it's look, we just try to call it. We do a lot of work, call like we see it. And that's kind of, that's look, we're very transparent, right? And I think that's sort of always been our style.
Thank you so
Great
much,
stuff.
Dan. Appreciate your time.
Look,
Dan Ives of Wedbush. Yeah.
And the only disappointment was I wanted Lutz to wear his white glasses, but
yes.
No, because I think when Lutz wears his white glasses, you're like, yo.
You must have saw the last episode.
No,
Yeah,
because,
All right, here you
like,
go.
It's
there.
the
There you
green
go.
glasses on
But does he
green
beat
days.
me? Does he beat
No,
me
because-
now or does he not?
Jeff, I feel like when you wear the white ones, you're like, yo, I'm gonna listen to what this guy. The other ones, like, yeah, I'm gonna listen. So I think the white ones.
All right.
There you go. And Larry,
no
you have upped
glasses.
your glasses game. There's no way around it.
At
Oh.
my age, I just have to wear what I'm
See.
given. That's it.
I know
Larry, you're
Larry.
in third. It's okay.
Larry on the glasses game. Okay,
Thank you, Dan.
guys.
See you
Thank
soon.
you, Dan.
Thanks
Bye,
a lot,
everybody.
Dan. Thanks for
Dan.
coming.